Welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet, the go-to podcast for parents with multiple kids, especially those with twins, triplets, or more, who are navigating the maze of modern family life and personal finance. Whether you're overwhelmed by education or retirement planning, parenting dilemmas, career transitions, or trying to define your purpose and plan, we're here to guide you with empathy, encouragement, and expertise. Hosted by Paul Fenner, founder of Tama Capital, a certified financial planner and parent to 4 kids, including a set of triplets. Our podcast is your ally in the quest for financial peace of mind, proving that money matters, but family comes first. Subscribe now and join our community of empowered parents at tamacapital.com. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Tama may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
What does comprehensive financial planning even mean? At Tama Capital, it means a family office where lifestyle planning such as retirement, college, portfolio management, and tax prep and planning are all under one umbrella. But it goes beyond numbers. We focus as much on the emotional side of financial planning as we do on the financial side. We get you. We understand your challenges of building a family, business or career, and a healthy life. We are devoted to wealth planning for families like yours because we are you. Learn how our family can help your family by visiting tamacapital.com. Are you feeling behind financially? Are you a parent juggling everything from college to retirement savings to kids' activities to daily expenses? Dr. Jennifer Dragonette returns for her much-anticipated monthly conversation with me, and we dive deep into a timely and universal theme. Why do so many families, even those who are doing well objectively, still feel like they're falling behind emotionally and financially? This has been a recurring theme during my planning season. There's this persistent sense of anxiety and not enoughness surrounding our personal and our financial lives. Dr. Jen helps us unpack why these feelings are valid, the impact of social comparison, and how our nervous systems are being stretched thin, not only by money matters, but also the broader stresses of today's world. We focus on actionable strategies for managing anxiety, from reframing distorted thoughts to embracing simple, foundational self-care. So whether you're overwhelmed by competing financial priorities or just trying to keep your head above water emotionally, this conversation will leave you with practical ways to reclaim a sense of safety, connectedness, and control. I hope you catch the secret message within this conversation. Spoiler alert, sometimes the simplest steps are the most powerful. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Jennifer Dragonette. Well, it's my favorite time of the month, or one of my favorite times of the month. It's Dr. Jen time. So, Jen, I don't think I've ever set it up that way, but I sure look forward to these calls and these conversations. And I know that the listeners do as well, because I still get really positive feedback about our conversations that happen, every month. So always glad to see you and have you on.
Oh, thanks so much, Paul. I like that. It's Dr. Jen time. Here we go.
For me, I don't know exactly when this episode will air, but we're talking mid-September right now, and I'm in the heart of what I call planning season. So this is the time of year that I sit down with all the families I work with and have our annual review. And my focus, quite contrary to most people, would be, oh, you're going to sit down and talk about numbers. Of course, that's not really how I roll. Yes, we'll talk about a little bit of numbers, but I'm more interested in people's emotions and how they're feeling about not only their financial lives, but their personal lives as well. And one of the really interesting things a theme that I've kind of pulled out of the 14 or 15 meetings I've had over the last couple of weeks, because by the time this airs, my planning season will probably be over, but I don't think that this theme is going to change, is that families feel like they're falling further behind, or at a minimum, just barely able to keep up emotionally, and in this case, more so financially. And so what I mean by this, and let me give a little more clarity to this, is I'm talking about families like you and I that have kids probably between the ages of elementary school all the way up to high school and into college. So I've said this a million times before, I write about it all the time, is there's no shortage of personal and financial priorities that are pulling on parents in this life stage. You think about saving for college, saving for retirement, paying for kids, activities, whether they're extracurricular, athletics, you name it. Potentially going on a vacation once a year. Now, some people are trying to help support their parents that are our age. So some people might look at that and say, well, those are first world problems to have. Like if I made the kind of money that you did, then oh my God, I'd be on like easy street. And I think that's a challenge for most people to realize, especially a lot of the families that I work with probably don't realize that they're in the top 7 to 8% of all income earners in the US. And there's like, I think 330 million people in the US right now. And so I'm trying to get my arms wrapped around kind of where this is coming from and how I can help people. It's kind of like Carl Richards actually kind of taught me this. It's like diagnose before you subscribe. Like have a conversation, try to understand like where these feelings, whether they're real or I don't want to say imaginary. I guess I don't know what the clinical term would be, but they're real to these people. And I'm like, this is a great topic to bring up with you and have us thrash around and see what we can find out, because there's some times where I have to be, very transparent and blunt with families I work with about where they're at financially. Sometimes I don't always deliver, easy news to take. But in a lot of the cases that I'm referring to right now is that these people on the surface are all doing well. But when I peel back that layer one or two, then I really get into, well, I don't really feel like I'm doing that well, and I feel like I'm falling behind, and how am I going to be able to support my family in the way that I do?
It's a really rich topic, Paul. And just as I was listening to you talk about that, there are a bunch of threads that we've briefly touched upon in different episodes. And I think it kind of folds a lot of things together. So I'll tell you what I'm hearing in there, and then maybe we can figure out where we want to dive a little deeper. Part of that question you just phrased of, like, we don't want to say that this feeling or this emotion is invalid or wrong. And, per some of our previous conversations, the reason that we don't want to say that is because it then puts that person on the receiving end, and they have to actually defend that emotion.
Yeah.
Right. So it, right? It's like the minute we say to someone, don't worry about that, their brain is going to give them 10 different reasons why they really should be worrying about it and why it's reasonable. So,
Which is why I never tell anybody to calm down when the market's like blowing up to the downside. That's the worst thing.
Exactly. It's this funny thing that our brains do when, if someone says, oh, you shouldn't be having that feeling, or that's not reasonable, we're like, oh, let me demonstrate to you why that's a reasonable feeling. So I love that you're, really aware of that and sensitive around that. And there are sometimes ways that our emotional response is elevated, maybe a little distorted around the facts or the reality of what we're dealing with. And it's typically going to be in the direction of fear, self-protection, trying to ensure that our families are okay, which totally makes sense. And so, if I'm working with someone, and I do work with people who have similar fears, am I going to be able to pay for college? Or, it feels like I'm okay. My financial advisor tells me okay, but I can't stop worrying about this. Usually I'm going to think about it kind of the way that we've talked about anxiety and how it shows up in our mind. And there are a few different ways that I might want to go with this, but, remembering that anxiety is going to present to us some pieces of information that it wants us to treat as facts. Like, yes, you're worried about this and it is going to happen and it's going to be really bad when it happens. And you're not going to be able to cope with that. You're not going to be able to handle the consequences. That's what those fears, that's what that anxiety sounds like when it shows up. And when we're talking about real tangible things like kids going to college, like buying a new home, buying a car, whatever it is, going on that vacation, part of the challenge that I see is that we are very comparative by nature. We look around us in the neighborhood and we look at the cars we see. We look at the other houses. We look at, social media and see who's going to what colleges. And, we get this very curated version of other people's lives staring us in the face all the time. And then we compare it to our own internal experience, which we know all of. So we know the worries. We know how far we had to stretch to get that car. We know how much we worried about it or all the sleepless nights. We don't know that about other people. So it appears that, and I think unfortunately right now in our society, it's even more curated. If it appears that everybody's got it together and we're slipping, we're not able to catch up to where we perceive other people to be. But we don't always register that it's a perception and it may not be reality.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, this is where I tend to go on my rant about bashing social media because it's just everybody's, human highlight reel. But I think that where the one area that I struggle, and I think you kind of touched on this, is that when I'm sitting down having these conversations with people, is me telling them that they're going to be okay, whether it's for college or retirement or whatever the objective is that we're talking about. What I'm finding is that that's not enough. And then my next layer to think about is, okay, how can I show them? And this is where everybody's different. And this is kind of like in your world too, where the person you're talking to at 12 o'clock today is going to be different than the person that you're talking to at 2. And you have to be able to adjust and pivot to that. I think that works in my world too, in the world of financial planning, in that if my words aren't enough to help ease their mind or give them a sense of, okay, yes, I'm going to be okay, then what can I do next? And the research that I've kind of read and reviewed on this is that even if you show them on paper, that still may not be enough. And so what I kind of struggle with is how do I find that happy medium to be able to show people that they are going to be okay and it is enough to where they can exhale and just relax their shoulders and breathe a little bit, because that's, I think, what I'm seeing a lot of people. And it's interesting that it's this time. When I say this time, I mean, when you look back 5 years ago going through COVID, that to me seemed like people would be even more stressed. But at least the people the families I was working with, yeah, there was, but I just see this escalating to this point today. And maybe it's because, and I clearly point this out, like, to get financially technical here for a second, is that we have seen this unheard of inflation streak that we haven't seen in decades. So things are really more expensive, and they're more expensive and the things that are more expensive for families are the things that we use every day, like groceries, gas, utilities, healthcare, college. Those things have all gone up in price. So the fact that a TV or computer has gone down in prices, this is the example I've literally give to people, doesn't necessarily like help you. Maybe if you're in the market for that, sure. But those big 4 or 5 things I just mentioned, those are real and in front of people like day in, day out. And I think that's where people are really struggling. And unfortunately, once inflation sets in, we rarely see prices actually decline. And if they're declining in those key areas, then from an economic standpoint, we have a much bigger problem. Like the economy is like, crashing.
Yeah. Well, you're bringing up a lot of really important points. And, one of these, I know we talked about this a little bit before we started recording today, and I promise I won't go down this road too much, but, there is a cultural situation that we're living in, right? So there's our family unit, there's our individual earnings, there's our, individual emotional safety. And then there's the culture that we live in. And the financial side, there's all of, these price increases and inflation. And on the emotional side, and I always love that you are so emotion focused. I think it's exactly right, because we think and feel a lot about our financial stability. On an emotional standpoint, we are in a very challenging situation. We're mid-September right now. I was just saying to you off camera that this is a tough week to be a trauma specialist. It's a hard time for a lot of people with all of the political unrest and all of the uncertainty in our country and honestly in our world. And not to go too far down that road, but it makes everything feel harder. It changes our lens through which we see all of the facts of our life. If we're walking around, with essentially an overactive nervous system, which I would argue many, many Americans are right now, and unfortunately probably will be even when this airs, what is happening is that we are not operating in a calm, rational, easy, carefree state. And so we're already a little bit heightened, right? Some people are a lot heightened. I often say it's kind of like our emotions are right underneath our chin, and it doesn't take much to kind of dip into despair or anxiety or depression or, a real trauma response. And when that happens for us, we lock it down, right? Everything feels scarier. Everything feels more worrisome. I need to squirrel away more, right? I need to be extra safe, extra careful. What if? And I think we've seen so much turbulence and instability, both economically and politically, that it's really hard to kind of rest on the certainties that we used to have. Like, just the world is okay. I'm going to be all right. I'm safe, right? Things tend to work out. I believe those things, and even I am kind of challenged to hold that these days. And that's
likewise,
not to say
I am
that,
too.
Yeah, and everybody listening, like, you're not alone. And honestly, most of my therapy sessions this past week or so have been reminding people of that you're not alone. This is probably impacting you in some way, right? And we don't notice it. And then, similar to what we were just saying about social media, even if we do notice the intense stress that our body's under just to keep us going, we feel alone in that because we're not necessarily talking about it, in all of our circles. So all of that is to say, looking at everything in context, it's not always rational, right? We can have the same amount of money in the bank today as tomorrow, but it might feel very scary tomorrow, and we might feel okay about it today, right? So it's not always about the numbers.
It's same number, different feeling.
Same number, exactly, right? So it's not really about the numbers. It's more about this felt sense of safety and enough and security. And so, from an intervention standpoint, I try to hold those three things that I mentioned about anxiety, which are really distortions. Not that we're stupid or crazy for thinking that. We all have cognitive distortions. I just said one. All, right? All or nothing. It's going to be fine or it's going to be terrible, right? That's a distortion. It's probably somewhere in the middle. We have distortions where we disqualify the positive. Yeah, I know that looks okay, but it doesn't count for some reason. Or we have distortions where we catastrophize. We do all this fortune telling into the future, and it's usually bad. So to intervene, I often try to go down all three of those pathways, just kind of holding the evidence as neutrally as we can. What's the evidence for and against that first piece, that something bad is definitely going to happen, right? I'm going to run out of money, or I won't have money for college. What's the evidence for and against that? And I'll come back to the for and against in a second.
Okay.
And then the second component, what's the evidence for and against that even if that happened, it would be catastrophic, right? And then lastly, and this is kind of the more intrapersonal piece, is what's the evidence for and against the idea that you couldn't cope with it if that did happen, if it really did go the way that you're afraid it would go? The reason that we do both for and against is to avoid that problem that we just mentioned, where if I'm saying, well, tell me all the reasons why that's not true, our brain is going to say, we're not considering the other ones, though, and those are going to get louder and more weighty. So we want to be able to say, it makes sense that you worry about this because, yeah, you just saw your net worth go down, or it makes sense that you worry about this because we don't know what's going to happen politically. And I'm hearing your financial advisor telling you that, right, as things are going, this is how much you'll have when we retire, et cetera. If we can hold both of those, that is a better reframe. Like, okay, so it makes sense that you're worrying about this. And what we know seems to say that it's probably going to be okay, at least not catastrophic. So we're starting to kind of turn down the volume on some of those concerns.
You just gave me like my thesis for the rest of planning season is to be able to have these conversations in that manner, to where, because I feel it too, like, and I'm very honest and transparent with the families I meet with and work with, that, hey, Teresa and I are going through the same things right now. And for those families I work with that have 3 or more kids, they have a special place in my heart, because I've always said that when you have that third kid, that changes something. It changes your family dynamics, both personally and financially, in a way where a family of 5 or more it's really different than a family of 4. And so to be able to validate those feelings or those emotions, and then on the other hand, this whole idea of holding 2 competing thoughts at the same time, where it's like, yeah, it could get a little rough, but long term, you know how this is going to be a blip, on the radar screen, if you will. And yes. So am I thinking about that in the right way?
I think so. And, the other, so yes, right. Holding both of those things, it reminds me of our conversation about yes, and
yeah.
Either
that
or.
That was a hit show, because I probably had like dozens of people reach out to me about that. That so and the glad. But, like when you add that but.
Yes. Because that's what our brain is trying to do. I know Paul's telling me I'm okay, but I'm worried about it. And if we're an either or, it's got to be one or the other, right? Paul's telling me I shouldn't worry, but I am worried. So I guess the worry is where I need to be, because it can't be both. Whereas if we can really embrace this, what is actually more true, both of these, right? I am worried about this, and I'm hearing my trusted advisor telling me that, he is honest and this is how he sees things rolling out for me. Both can be true, and we can tap into more of that, undistorted approach, more of that kind of wise mind space that we've talked about, where we're not simply existing in the emotional mind, which is more fear-based, nor are we simply existing in the rational mind, which is all of the logic, that there is room for both. We can say, yeah, it makes sense that I worry about this. College is really important to me. I want all of my children to be able to go to college, and, whatever other things need to be factored in there. I'm hearing that I will have enough money, or even if I don't, here's what we would do. Right?
Yeah.
Or even if they don't go to college, here's what they would do. Sometimes I think even just allowing ourselves to walk down those paths, what if? Because the what ifs are our brain's version of like, don't go down there, right? You couldn't handle that path. This is not going to turn out okay. And so we don't. And that creates more and more anxiety. That's often how I hear it from my clients is, I don't know how we're going to pay for college, and I don't know what we do if we get there. And my next question is, would you be willing to think about what we do if we get there? Because we probably can have a plan, right? You probably could have a plan, maybe multiple plans. And as uncomfortable as it is to think about that feared event, or, running out of money, or not having enough to do what you think everybody around you is doing, if we walk down that road and say, all right, let's try it on, right? Let's finish that sentence. If I couldn't, then in reality, right? What would happen? Could you cope with that? And most of the time, honestly, when I walk down that road, the what if is tolerable. Maybe it's not the best, it's not what we want, but it's probably not the worst case scenario. It might not be the best case scenario either. There's some grayscale in there. And then we can really bolster ourselves around, okay, I don't want this to be what happens. And if it does, I have plan A, plan B, plan C. I just file that away. Or if I'm lucky enough to work with a financial advisor, they file it away for me, right? We have a collaborative plan. And then it's not so scary because it's not all these question marks. We don't like those question marks in our minds.
Yeah, I think, this is where like the having options comes into play, and being able, and when I'm working, like when I'm in the really the throes of detailed planning and actually putting plans together, I've found that having options laid out in front of people, whether you call it 1, 2, or 3, or A, B, and C, I've found that kind of helps as well, because you can kind of give like a good or better or best, or a worst case, better or best case kind of scenario. Mm-hmm. And I think that maybe helps dial down, that temperature a little bit. One of the things I've been thinking about in listening to you talk through all this is I go back to like the tried and true research about, okay, well, what can you do to help resolve or reduce the amount of anxiety that you're going through, whether it's personal or financial. And I think of getting some kind of like outdoor exercise, getting enough sleep, eating right, and being around people that you care about. And all those things always sound so simple, but yet but in reality, it's hard to do those things.
Yep, absolutely. I know most of our listeners are audio listeners, but for those of you who are watching, you might see me smile real big because
we have a lot of YouTube. We have just as many YouTube watchers now, so it's great. The channel's gone well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, the reason that I just got that big smile is because, Paul, I think you're going to be a therapist in your next life. I mean, this is just so much what I talk with people about, and it isn't the really kind of mind blowing, rocket science approach to the world, and yet it is the point. What you're talking about is emotion regulation. And when I talk about how to take care of ourselves, and particularly when we're in a kind of bathing in stress, whether it's personal, familial, professional, political, whatever it is, I recommend that we take care of ourselves as though we are a small child. And to our parents.
I've never heard that one before. That's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, I know you have a lot of parents who listen, and I'm a parent. When we have a very small child, how do we take care of them? If they're upset, we wonder, are they tired? Right? Do they need to rest? Are they hungry? Do they need to eat? Do they need to move their bodies? Do they need to be creative? Do they need to play? Right? That we are really good at offering solutions and ideas to take care of our little ones. And then we just lose all of that sometimes, or we forget about that for ourselves. And so I'm really with you, Paul, that sometimes people come to see me and, they're expecting some intervention that they have never heard of, or, that there's going to be something mind blowing. And sometimes there's that, or there's a different way to think about how they're approaching their problems. And sometimes they're really just denying themselves care and real comfort and support. There's a lot of talk about self-care these days, which is great. And I'm glad people are taking care of themselves. What I mean when I talk about self-care is not necessarily go get in a bubble bath and, listen to classical music and do the crossword puzzle. That's great. What I really mean with self-care is, are you taking care of your medical needs? Right? Are you seeing a doctor about the things that are really concerning to you? Because that's going to add up as stress. Are you getting enough sleep? Like, really, are you getting enough sleep? None of us are, right? Are we eating food that actually nourishes us? Or are we kind of cramming down a little bit where we can here and there? Are we drinking water? Are we moving our bodies, right? Are we getting outside in nature? These are really some of the must-haves. And, if anybody's listening, like, oh, yeah, I will say that again. These are must-haves. We have to have these components in our life. We know what happens if our children don't have that. If we prevented our children from seeing their friends for a month, they would be bouncing off the walls. Right. And yet, how many of us adults really make space for our close friendships? How many of us adults are willing to say to somebody, I am so scared and stressed right now? How many of us adults are willing to say, that sounds fun. I need to rest this weekend. I need to sleep. I need to take care of myself. I need to connect with my partner. So all of this, it doesn't directly address the stress around all of the financial concerns or how do we pay for things. It's going to make it all feel worse, though. So that idea of, the stress being right underneath our chin, some things we can control, some things we can't. Let's avoid avoidable suffering. Let's protect our baseline. That's the way I often talk about it when I'm training therapists around emotion regulation skills, which are exactly these. It's not even more complicated than this, right? It's like fill your life with things that you enjoy. Take good care of yourself. Feed your body. Pay attention if you're hurting. I talked about it as protecting our baseline, right? Keeping our baseline stability as high as possible so that when these inevitable dips and anxieties come in, we're not already depleted. We're not already at the bottom of our barrel with nothing left to give or to support other people or to get ourselves through a really hard week. So the more we can just, day on day, these are really things that I try to do every day. I'm not perfect, but I try. And I recommend people do all of these things every day so that we're as good as can be to face the inevitable stresses that come our way.
I've got this thought is both, of course, it's both personal, emotional, and financial. My question is why do we struggle with doing the simple things like going out for a walk? But if somebody told you need to take this pill, you would probably do it. And I see the same thing on the financial on the financial side of this, where if you just start putting a little bit away, it's better than doing nothing. But then like I talk with other people that are looking for these complex investment strategies, if you will, to get really finite. And I'm like, why do we really need to do that? Why can't we just keep it simple? And that's a theme that I always come back to is I think the acronym is KISS, like keep it simple, stupid. And I wonder now, like listening to you talk about this, like what's going on in our minds that wants us to do something big and complex rather than just doing the simple thing that's going to make us better?
It's a really interesting question, Paul. I think about this a lot too.
That's probably a whole nother conversation.
I think, I'll give you my initial thoughts about it, and maybe there is more to say, but I think on the one hand, in terms of kind of like why do we seek out this complexity when the simplicity is right there? I think sometimes we believe, and this might be a distortion too, we believe that we've already tried that. Or we believe that it's not enough, right? If that were enough, I'd be fine. And then if we're really honest with ourselves and introspective, we're probably not doing those things as well as we think we are. So sometimes even just to get at that question, I might ask someone to track those behaviors. And like, great, you're telling me that you're eating in a way that you're happy with and you're sleeping well. Let's just track it for a week or two, get a baseline, like see where we are, right? If it's great, fantastic. Then we don't need to try that. We can move on to something a little bit more complicated. What I sometimes find is that we really aren't doing all the things that we think we are. And so we're kind of, maybe we try walking for a week and we're like, oh, it feels good. And then we kind of lose motivation or lose time. And we're like, oh, that didn't work. But did it not work because it didn't work, or did it not work because we didn't continue doing it, right? So sometimes bringing in, a pill or a massive intervention is unnecessary because we haven't done the baseline stuff, the baseline work. I think the other thing is there is, and this is more kind of where I tend to find my clients when I'm working with them around this, sometimes a question of worthiness or deservingness. Do I deserve to be taken care of in that way? Or, if I have time to take someone to the doctor, it's going to be my kid and not me. Or if I have space to go for a walk, I should be, we hear some shoulds, right? Usually when there's a should, there's a cognitive distortion. I should be home instead doing something. Or if I have time to go for a run, I should be earning money instead. Right. So we put our own needs oftentimes way at the bottom of that list of priorities as though they're optional. They're not. Right. We will see it flare up in all of these other concerns. And so that KISS acronym, is really pertinent because we will make things more complicated if we need to. If we don't exercise for months and months, we might need a more serious intervention. We might need a medical intervention or a pill or something. If I don't eat nutritious food for years and years, I really might need something that's more intensive. So we can be kinder to ourselves, raising up our priority in terms of taking care of ourselves. It's not selfish. It's not self-centered. We really do. For those of us who are other focused, we owe it to the people we love to be taking care of ourselves as though we're a small child. We have nothing to give if we don't.
Well, I think that's probably a perfect way to wrap up this conversation on this topic. And I always love how we start with one idea and we branch off into others. And so hopefully everybody has found this valuable. So if you are going through high levels of anxiety, start with the basics, do the simple things, and you'll probably get to where you want to go much faster. Well, Dr. Jen, thank you so much for being back on. Like I said, I love these conversations with you every month, and I know others are getting a lot of value out of these as well, listening to you. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. That's great to hear. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Cheers. One of the things I love about having Dr. Jen on is that she just has the most calming voice. I don't know if you agree or not, but I've had lots of listeners, YouTube watchers reach out and say the same thing. And it's something I really enjoy about these conversations, especially right now as I go through my annual planning season with families I work with at TAMA. And this reoccurring theme that families, individuals and families are struggling with, feeling like they're being left behind. And these are people, as I mentioned, that are doing relatively well, that really don't have that much to worry about. But that doesn't mean that their feelings shouldn't be validated. And it goes back to one of the, I think, key parts of our conversation is this idea of holding competing thoughts at the same time. For example, yes and rather than either or, looking at things black and white. You can acknowledge your concerns and your worries about what's going on today and in the future, but also recognize that there's evidence that things might turn out okay. So embracing both can reframe your mindset and dial down some of the stress and anxiety that you may be feeling. I think the other key takeaway, and hopefully you caught this is the real secret of this conversation, is that the simple things can be what's most powerful. And those simple things are taking care of yourself, getting back to the basics, sleep, good food, good nutrition, staying connected, getting outside, exercising, asking for help are not luxuries, but in our overscheduled, overstimulated minds, they sure feel like they are. So one really cool point that Dr. Jen pointed out was to treat yourself, if you're a parent, with the same care you would give your own child. And if you don't have kids, hopefully think about the care that your parents took for you when you were young. Now that you've made it to the end of another great conversation, are you looking for more? If so, head over to tamacapital.com where you will find all of our conversations. Use the search feature to find the topic or guest you would love to learn more about. Also, don't forget to make someone else's day by sharing our show. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.